It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars show. On this week's episode, we're going to talk briefly about what Star Wars gets right. I went out and saw Thor: Love and Thunder, and that's a good example of when storytelling gets it wrong, as opposed to something within Star Wars that I think 95% of the time, Star Wars does better than most other franchises. Plus, we're going to get into a lot of your listener feedback. I got a lot of responses and your thoughts on Obi Wan Kenobi, the finale, the series as a whole, and I'll share with you my thoughts as you share your thoughts. Thank you so much for checking the show out this week. Let's go ahead and get right to it.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you. Just let it in.
It is my nerd world, and welcome to it. I am your host, Jon Justice, here to talk Star Wars once again this week. I've had a lot of time off as I recover from my open heart surgery. Really looking forward to getting back to the day job, doing that thing with my fingers, coming up next week, but not before we talk a little Star Wars. So, a lot of listener feedback this week, and thank you so much to everybody who wrote in either on YouTube or dropped me an email, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, most of which has been in response to the Obi Wan Kenobi season finale and the series as a whole. So that's what we'll be spending the majority of time on the show this week talking about. I just wanted to take a few moments, though, and talk a little bit about what Star Wars gets right, in my opinion. And this applies to not just Star Wars, but to a vast majority of storytelling. And that is the storytelling in and of itself. It's one of the things that I really do appreciate about the Star Wars franchise and the vast majority of the stories that have been told over the course of the past 40-plus years. I firmly believe that Star Wars: A New Hope was successful because of the simplicity of the story. You're good versus evil. There was a very clear objective that needed to be met in the middle of this hero's journey. And I honestly believe that while the elements of Star Wars, the setting, right, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the lived-in universe feel and look, all of those things worked together, but none of it would have been as successful if it hadn't been for the fact that George Lucas really did craft this rather simple yet effective, easy to understand, follow, and compelling story. Again, good versus evil. It's one of the things that I really wanted to do, and I feel like I had some level of success in doing this when I wrote my first story, EMBARK. I wanted something that was easy to, not easy to follow, but that there was a clear objective here. Here is the conflict, here are our heroes, and here's what they have to do to bring resolve to all of it. I bring all this up because we went out yesterday. I'm recording this on Friday. Hey, it's my birthday. Big 5-0 today. Oh my gosh, I'm 50. Anyway, we went out yesterday afternoon and saw Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, I was a huge fan of Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok is probably one of my favorite MCU movies. Just a really fun, exciting, funny, one of the funniest Marvel Cinematic Universe stories, movies that has been made, in my opinion. And I really like Taika Waititi's storytelling, for the most part, from everything that I've seen from him. But Thor Love and Thunder, and again, this is all subjective, right? I got to make sure I put that out there, that when we talk about these things, this is just my opinion. It's all subjective. You may disagree, and that's okay. But Thor Love and Thunder really just fell flat for me. The jokes didn't really land. The action was just kind of okay. But mostly it didn't work for me because the story was really kind of muddled. Like, I got it and I understood it and I could follow it, but it wasn't very compelling in my opinion. And Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and again, this is a Star Wars podcast, but I'm going to relate it back to Star Wars. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness suffers kind of the same problem in my opinion. I saw it the first time in the theater and I enjoyed it, but we watched it at home on Disney Plus last week, and I kind of found myself bored. Again, the story was just really kind of convoluted and muddled. They try to jam so much into it, and it really made me appreciate other recent releases, even though it's kind of unfair to compare the two. But you look at a movie like Top Gun Maverick, and while it does have a lot of similarities to A New Hope and even The Force Awakens, I think ultimately the similarities that Top Gun Maverick has and why that movie has been so successful is exactly what I was talking about with Star Wars A New Hope. It was very clear from the beginning of that story, this is the objective. Here is the mission and the reason why. And it was so effective in Top Gun Maverick that you didn't even need to attach to it any named enemy. It was basically just Rogue Nation that they would have to go up against to achieve the goal at the end of the film. And this also speaks to Star Wars A New Hope, because we didn't know about the Empire. We didn't have all the backstory that we got in the prequels or the Clone Wars or anything else when the first movie came out. We were just thrust into this very simple, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, good versus evil. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and these are the objectives. And it absolutely 100% works. And I'm bothered by some of the recent decisions in modern movie storytelling as to why they feel the need to make it so muddled and condensed and confusing to a certain point. To a lesser extent, I watched the Spider-Man No Way Home, and I really enjoyed that movie. I enjoyed that movie more when spoiler alert, when the other Spider-Men show up. But even that movie in and of itself, it gets a little bit too bogged down. Not nearly as bad as Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, mind you. But I do appreciate, though, in Spider-Man No Way Home, there was kind of a clear objective here in that, sort of the redemption of these characters. Now, there's a whole other sidebar conversation that I'm not going to have on this show. Maybe on another episode coming up, because I also worry when it comes to a lot of the storytelling, and Star Wars included, this desire to constantly redeem the bad guys. And I know that was a theme in Star Wars, and so again, I don't want to crack that egg right now, because that could get really confusing. But in Obi Wan Kenobi, which we'll talk about here more via your listener feedback, like I think I would have appreciated it more if Riva had what we've been told was its sort of original ending, where she was actually going to die at the end of the series, rather than get this redemption arc. Now, I also understand that this is very typical for Star Wars, and this is following in the same lines as previous storytelling. So let me get back to the topic at hand before we dive into your listener feedback, and I get way off topic here. It's the one thing that I do believe, though, the Star Wars does right, is the simplicity within the storytelling. And even with shows like Obi Wan Kenobi, which didn't completely land for me. I haven't sat down and watched it beginning to end yet. And as I mentioned on previous shows, most of the issues that I had with it came down to the production value of it, which was also really strange, because I was watching season 2 of The Mandalorian, the third to last episode, and I mean, really, production-wise, it wasn't that far off the mark from what we got in Obi Wan Kenobi, but just for some reason, the way that show was shot just rubbed me the wrong way. However, I will give Obi Wan Kenobi a little bit of credit, because the storytelling was fairly straightforward, and it wasn't very convoluted. You had the stakes that were raised early on in the series. the challenges that Obi Wan Kenobi had to face, leading to an ultimate standoff at the end of it. Now, we can argue whether or not this show was necessary. We can argue whether or not this muddles some of the previous content as it relates to Darth Vader and Obi Wan Kenobi. I'm strictly talking about just the storytelling. I think it's also what's made The Mandalorian so great. The storytelling in the Mandalorian, while it was rather and is rather formulaic of like video game levels where each episode, the Mandalorian needs to achieve a goal, but before he does that, he has to go and do this other thing. I'm totally fine with that storytelling. It absolutely works. And again, it's because it's rather straightforward. It's not confusing. We know exactly what the stakes are. And even for some of the issues that I had in Book of Boba Fett, I understand the reasons why they wanted to do the show that way, and I will give Star Wars credit where credit is due. That storytelling was also very straightforward, wasn't muddled. As a matter of fact, I think a show like Boba Fett could have gotten a little bit more dense. And that's not to say that you can't have shows that have multiple storylines and a lot of density to it. I believe we're absolutely going to get that in Andor coming up, next month, which I'm really, really excited for reasons that I've talked about on previous shows. They've been working on this show for a long time. It wasn't reliant on the volume. Some of the writers that are involved have already proved themselves on numerous other projects. So I think that Andor could potentially be as good as I had hoped Obi Wan Kenobi was going to be. But again, as long as you make it cogent and easy to follow, it can be really, really compelling. And I think the best example you can give is like Game of Thrones. And I keep waiting for that Game of Thrones type Star Wars story where it is broader and you do have multiple storylines and you can utilize the longer format of live action, television streaming, which I don't personally believe Disney has taken full advantage of, and perhaps that's what we're going to see in Andor again coming up next month. So just wanted to spend a few minutes again, my opinion of what Star Wars gets right, and this is storytelling. The storytelling in the original trilogy was so, so good. And it was good because George Lucas did his due diligence in getting into Joseph Campbell. And it's the same thing with the prequels. For the issues that people had with the prequels when they were released, most everybody agreed that the story was really, really good. And that, again, can be attributed to George Lucas doing his homework and studying the works of Joseph Campbell and The Hero's Tale and applying to that, and applying the storytelling to that. And then handing it off to savvy directors and writers like Jon Favreau, and like Dave Filoni as well. I hope the Marvel Cinematic Universe gets back to this type of storytelling that I'm talking about, because after we walked out of Thor: Love and Thunder, there was a listener to the show who had come out to join us, and we were talking about how, or me personally, I just feel like the MCU, this particular phase of the MCU has not been nearly as good as the previous phases, and I believe it's because of what I'm talking about. It's just the stories are getting way, way, way too convoluted and too muddled. When you go back and look at Infinity War and Endgame, that to me is really, really good storytelling. Clear objectives by the bad guy and Thanos wanting to get the stones for a very specific reason, and the heroes having to stop him to save half of the universe. It doesn't really get much simpler than that. I mean, I just described Infinity War and Endgame. You want me to go and describe what Thor: Love and Thunder was about? It would take me much longer than that, and the same thing rings true for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But you want to talk about Obi Wan Kenobi? Obi Wan Kenobi gets called out of hiding, having to watch over Luke Skywalker because his twin sister, who is as equally as important to the future of the galaxy, has been kidnapped, and Obi Wan Kenobi is the one person who can go and get her back. Simple. Done. In the meantime, there's this former Jedi who's turned Inquisitor who is seeking revenge, spoiler alert, on the Dark Lord of the Sith that stabbed her as a little kid when she was still training to be a Jedi. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can leave a comment on YouTube. And as I promised, let's go ahead and get to your listener feedback this week.
I need someone to Show me my place in all this.
You know what? And before I get to this, though, I didn't do notes this week. There wasn't a lot of news going on, and I thought, I got a lot of listener feedback. I'm just going to kind of riff on good storytelling in Star Wars. The whole reason I brought it up and what the point I wanted to make, which I forgot about until I hit the intro to listener feedback, was watching The Rise of Skywalker the other day. And how much I love and appreciate that movie. And again, because of the storytelling. I know people didn't really care for the Wayfinder MacGuffin in it, but I really appreciated the storytelling in that movie. The Resistance needs to gather forces to fight the Final Order because Palpatine has returned. In the meantime, Rey and her friends are searching for these Wayfinders to go and find the location of where this massive Sith Eternal fleet is. I just love that movie, man. Just absolutely love that movie. All right. First off, Ben Fisher writes in, my overall thoughts on Obi-Wan. I didn't get too bothered by the production like you did. I really did not notice it until you started pointing things out. Sorry about that, Ben. What made this series difficult for me, which is relevant to what I've been talking about, was the story. I like getting to know a new character, watching that journey. The only character that was offered was Riva, and they really didn't focus much on it. It was secondary, maybe even a third story behind Leia being kidnapped and the Vader-Obi-Wan connection. This is what hit home for me with The Mandalorian and Boba Fett. We really didn't know much about these characters, and we got a better understanding of them through the episodes. They hyped bringing back Hayden Christensen, and we barely see him. We didn't see a scene with him in private reflecting with his mask off, etc. We only see him in flashbacks under a mask. Under a mask. For all I know, it wasn't even him under the mask for the majority of the episodes. And from my understanding, yeah, he wasn't in a lot of the Vader scenes. The last battle between Vader and Obi-Wan was, the ending was disappointing. You put Obi-Wan in a position where he defeats Vader again and can kill him, but have him walk away for obvious reasons? Why put him in that position? This should have been an epic battle that ends with them being separated and needing to escape to survive, a la Ben and Rey's first battle. Or Obi-Wan barely escaping defeat. Give a legit reason why both of them are still alive after fighting, not because Obi-Wan walks away. Can Obi-Wan really not bring himself to kill Vader, knowing the atrocities that he caused? If Lego is not hyping a set for Obi-Wan, then do we know it's bad? I quickly looked, and the only set that I would want is the Inquisitor transport. Yeah, me too. Everything else, blah. I know you shouldn't make a series or movie to sell product, but it's Star Wars. There was nothing exciting about this series in the sense of marketable product, which should be a sign that something needed to be done differently. Unfortunately, this was a show that I thought I needed but didn't, which is the exact opposite of The Mandalorian and Bad Batch. Possibly put Boba Fett on that list. Curious your thoughts on these points. I liked your comment there of, this was the show that I thought I needed but didn't, which was exactly the opposite of The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch. There was a great quote from Steve Jobs saying that, or somebody quoting about Steve Jobs, saying that Apple creates products that we didn't know we couldn't live without. And what you're speaking to, Ben, if I can get convoluted again, is I think the storytelling. If the storytelling's good, then it really doesn't matter. And while I appreciated the storytelling in Obi Wan Kenobi, I am with you. It was very simple, but ultimately it also wasn't very compelling either. Whereas with The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch, those were both great series, mostly because it had a lot of great storytelling. And I really do attribute that to Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni specifically. I mean, those are the two individuals behind both The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch, and Dave Filoni being a disciple under an underling under George Lucas, having learned from the master of Star Wars. And Jon Favreau just being a flat-out good storyteller. For the most part. They all have hits and misses, right? Not every single one of my EMBARK books is great, but most of them are good. All right, friend of the show, Severin, writes this. My overall impression of Obi-Wan was meh. The trailers made it look like it was going to have a really intriguing plot, but I felt the entire series lacked purpose and focus. It almost seemed like Riva's story than anyone else's. Boy, it's funny, you pointing that out just like Ben did. Even with Ewan being the star of the show. But seeing Ewan as Obi-Wan again almost made up for my problems with it. So I can't really complain. It was good entertainment. Just like you said, I also had a very hard time figuring out what the Obi Wan Kenobi theme was supposed to be. I kept waiting for it in the first episode, but it seemed to never fully realize itself, which was so disappointing. I think Obi-Wan's character deserves nothing less than an epically gorgeous melody. What I guess was supposed to be the theme just felt concrete and immobile to me. It also sounded forced out, like a student composition from Music 101 class, and the rest of the score was nothing to write home about. How can that be when the score for Loki was so completely delicious? I don't get it. My favorite scene is probably the Qui-Gon cameo. I wasn't expecting that. I hope you and yours had a good 4th, and you're in my prayers for your recoveries. Thank you, Severin. You know, I can't help but wonder, and we'll probably never get confirmation of this, but I can't help but wonder with Obi Wan Kenobi if, and I was talking with this friend of the show that I mentioned, who we met up with at the movie yesterday at the Thor: Love and Thunder, and he made this comment that, you know, it was kind of a completely different team than what we saw on the Book of Boba Fett, and at least that's our understanding, right? The Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian. This was a completely separate team working on this. And perhaps these were individuals that were newer to the creative process. And Disney and Lucasfilm, maybe, I'm kind of just speculating here. Perhaps Disney and Lucasfilm thought, hey, Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of the most sought-after series and beloved characters. Let's get a group of new people who we can kind of groom on this particular show. I mean, even Deborah Chow herself as a director didn't really have much else to her credit. So this series, in my opinion, is akin to being her first big project. And you look at an individual like a David Fincher, and he is, in my opinion, one of the greatest living directors that we have right now. But you go back and look at his really early work, and specifically Alien 3. Now, the director's cut of Alien 3 is solid. I really enjoy that. But it got chopped up by the studio when it was released in the theaters. But you compare even the director's cut of Alien 3 to any of David Fincher's other films, and there's a vast improvement. You've got to get past that first big project to really, you know, figure out your own directorial voice or your own writing. I mean, the same thing rings true when I wrote EMBARK. I would absolutely admit that every book from the first book has gotten better as I've just gotten better as a writer, which is also why I went back and retooled a lot of book 1 afterwards. And there's a lot of individuals that advocate for going and rewriting your first novel. I don't think I'll ever do that. I think it's solid enough to get people introduced to the story. But be that as it may, in terms of my writing style, that first book is arguably the weakest of the rest of the series, but hopefully good enough to where people will still go and check out the other stories because of the story, right? The importance of story, which was what I was so focused on when writing that first one. So you can't help but wonder when it comes to Obi Wan Kenobi if it was kind of by design. Let's go ahead and give these people the opportunity to create this show, even though they may be brand new at creating these types of live action programs. I'm actually going to go ahead and start watching it again, I think, today. I don't really have anything else planned after the podcast, and I have these last 3 days before I get back to work, and I'm thinking I may just go ahead and restart Obi Wan Kenobi beginning to end now that we have the entire series out there and see how I feel about it, seeing the entire thing within its, sort of binge watching it within a weekend. All right, let's get back to more of your listener feedback, and Rick writes in, I listened to the final podcast for Kenobi, and I have some questions. Why did Riva go after Luke? I know that garbled transmission said something about kids, but how did she assume that they are Vader's kids, and why try to kill them? My understanding, and I was confused by that too, Rick, my understanding was she didn't necessarily know that the child that was mentioned in the transmission was Luke's son. All that she knew based off of that transmission was that child was important and was being protected. And that if she was important to Vader. So if she was going to be able to get back at Vader, she would go and get at that kid, even if she didn't know the relationship of that child. Rick goes on and asks, if the garbled transmission was talking about Vader's kids, how did they know? Maybe that was in a previous episode, but I don't remember. Again, my understanding was she didn't know that it was Vader's kids. All that she knew was that child was important to Vader, and therefore hurting that child would end up hurting Vader. Which is why at the end you get the redemption part of it, where she couldn't bring herself to do to the child, Luke Skywalker, what Anakin Skywalker, then Darth Vader, did to her at the onset of Order 66 on Coruscant. Is Riva dead or alive? She's alive. You spoke about her death, but in the last episode, she looks very much alive. No, she's alive. I think the original intention, Rick, was to have her die. That had been admitted by some of the storytellers, and I think that was included in the original version of the movie, if I'm not mistaken, was that she was supposed to die. They may have even changed it for the series as well, but she was supposed to die at the end of the series, and they ended up going with the story change. Next up, friend of the show, Irene Davis writes in. Hope you are doing really well, John, and that life is a little less stressful. Health is everything, so may the Force be with you. Things are getting better every single day, Irene. I appreciate that. Obi Wan Kenobi, when viewed back to back, makes a perfect film, originally written as a trilogy for movies, then adapted for the small screen. I guess we are going to get a second and third season. I have not heard about a third season, but I have heard about a second season, which I'm fine with. Look at Star Wars. I'll always take more Star Wars. And if anything, we know that Disney and Lucasfilm, they pay attention to the critics and the commentary around it. My thought is we're probably not going to see a show created by Disney, a Star Wars show created by Disney that will have the same complaints. Disney and Lucasfilm, I think they do on occasion listen to the fans, and things like production value. When you're looking at things like production value, I mean, those are things that are easily fixed. So I think of all the Disney releases so far, in my opinion, Obi Wan Kenobi is the worst looking, but I also don't think that trend is going to continue either. All right. JC Val 93 writes, thoughts on Obi Wan Kenobi overall? I give it a B-. Finale was by far the best of the series. Could some of the production been better? Of course, but it's a limited show, so budget limitations are clearly a factor. Personally, I wouldn't mind a season 2 with maybe a storyline related to Maul. Not going to happen just because of what happened to Maul in Rebels. More interaction with the Lars clan, and Luke. And I will say, after viewing this series, when Ben says to Luke in his cave in Star Wars, I'm getting too old for this kind of thing, has added meaning. Yeah, I will give you that. Having watched A New Hope after watching all of Obi-Wan Kenobi, I will say that it did do what a lot of content has done pre A New Hope, especially Rogue One. It does add more depth to when you're watching A New Hope. Keep up the good work and keep getting strong. Yeah, I would love to see a new movie back on the big screen and a Memorial Day weekend release like with the original trilogy. I totally agree. And that might happen. There's a lot of chatter right now that there could be a pending streaming collapse. The box office numbers are rebounding in a way that I don't think most studios were expecting. As a matter of fact, heading into this weekend, this is going to be the first weekend in, well, since the pandemic easily, that you may have two back-to-back opening $100 million weekends with Minions and Thor Love and Thunder this weekend. Minions last weekend and Thor Love and Thunder this weekend. So the box office is definitely rebounding, and a lot of the industry insiders and studios were not expecting that to happen. I still think the almighty dollar is attached to the big screen. And I still think the Star Wars works best on the big screen with big, sweeping, epic storytelling. So my guess is we'll see a Star Wars movie again sooner than later. Maybe not as soon as I had hoped with 2023. And actually, based off of Thor: Love and Thunder, Taika Waititi's latest movie, if Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie is the next one coming down the road, I'm way less excited about it than I was before. I still think my theory of Rogue Squadron getting resurrected and being streamlined to go into production rather quickly based off of the success of Top Gun Maverick. I still think that's a better theory at this point in time. And lastly, a friend of the show, Miranda Alicia, writes, Kenobi may be an imperfect show, but one day it will be looked back on as a classic. And that's how I'm going to look at it. I hope you're doing well and you have a wonderful holiday. Again, thank you. I did have a wonderful holiday, Miranda, and having a pretty good birthday so far. Speaking of which, we're at the end of the show. Thank you so much for checking out My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. You can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. And as always, if you want to support the show, especially on my birthday, as my voice cracks, what better way to celebrate my birthday than to treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction written for adults but great for ages 11 plus by EMBARK Book 1 or the entire series today. Available in paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. If you like your science fiction, space opera, science fiction, military, epic, filled with romance and action, good, strong family values, good tyranny, freedom versus tyranny, good versus evil, then EMBARK is perfect for you. Available on Amazon or mynerdworld.net. EMBARK Book 1, the story goes as follows. As Earth faces its end, the fight to rule the stars begins. Taft Guardia picked the right day to upgrade his ship when fellow pilot Kate Amaro arrived needing help investigating a cryptic message left behind by her late aerospace engineer father. Unaware that an industrial accident inside of Earth's largest supplier of civilian and military spacecraft has set off an apocalyptic chain of events, they make a shocking discovery. As war erupts during the global evacuation, Earth's evacuees stand upon the brink of annihilation. Realizing the significance of what they found, with the help of a ragtag squadron of pilots, Taft and Katha might be humanity's greatest hope for survival among the stars. Don't miss this 2021 Tale Flick Discovery Sci-Fi Award-winning series, a perfect way to celebrate my 50th birthday by going to Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. And you can pick up the ebook for EMBARK Book 1 for just 99 cents and the entire opening trilogy, which does complete a full story arc. Books 1, 2, and 3 for just $3.99 in ebook as well. Amazon.com, search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. Thank you so much for spending some time with the show this week. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.